Thank you. It's probably a bit surreal that we're still in this chamber talking about, this same issue, because it seems to come up every single solitary year. I think it was about 2012 or 2013 when it began, and really, on occasions, because the government had such a big majority, they essentially rammed through legislation. I remember one particular occasion, it was just before the Christmas recess, and the entire opposition walked out to try and highlight the inadequacy in the legislation. The government were so arrogant that you couldn't get it across at the time because they pretty much could do anything because of the scale of the majority. So it was a fundamentally flawed piece of legislation, and I think that has really been demonstrated over time. Many of the members of that government still sit in this House, but what's different is that there's less of a majority, or there's a minority government, and I think that means that legitimate concerns have a better chance of being heard. The arrogance around that time has ensured that for the last 4 years, has been fraught with tensions surrounding Irish water. And to say this was a doomed, I think it was a doomed enterprise right from the get-go, and I think that's no exaggeration. I just hope there's lessons learned, in that time. While we obviously welcome the fact that the enormous public outcry and determined and sustained campaign has culminated in the abolition of the water charges, I still have huge concerns regarding the costs involved. For example, the metering programme and the contractual obligations, which may be, superseding best spending practice or decisions. For example, the metering programme. If we looked at, for example, prior to the introduction of Irish water, and you looked at the leakage rates around the country, for example, Kildare had one of the lowest, if not the lowest, leakage rates in the country at the time, and that was the first county selected to put in meters. It just didn't make sense that this was about conservation. If that was the case, the methodology has changed for how that's calculated since Irish water was established. So it's not that easy to look at a like with like comparison. The lifespan of the meters only runs between 15 and 20 years. Yet we're continuing to install them on the basis of contracts that were agreed rather than on the basis of what makes sense. And let me be clear from the outset of the water controversy, I've been clear about the need for recognising the importance of conservation. But Irish water was never about conservation. It was, essentially, we saw by the leaked PR memos about turning citizens into customers, and something that I think was firmly rejected. It was about borrowing off the balance sheet, borrowing that has to be paid back, and it was a full cost recovery model. And people understood exactly what that meant to them and where it fell in the cycle of additional charges and taxes and the cuts that people were seeing in their incomes. So I think that there was a very real political issue in relation to that. But that the notion that every house requires a meter to guarantee conservation is not true. And the very fact that Kildare, for example, had such a good system prior to any meter being put in, I think they had achieved 7% below what the 20-year objective was for Irish water before a meter was installed. And essentially that was because there was very good telemetry, a very good telemetry section in the county council. And there's a lot of criticism about the county councils, but in actual fact, when you ring, and I had reason to do it last week, somebody was on trying to find out whether there was burst pipe. It was a fairly large burst. Rang to find out when it was likely to be back. I rang Irish Water, and in fact, I got some bit of information. But then when I rang the county council, I got way more information. So the idea that the county councils and these 34 local authorities, whatever, were going to disappear and you're going to have this big entity on top of it, actually wasn't the case, because it was going to be the county councils were going to be, if you like, contracted to do the works, because you know, it's self-evident that the pipes are where the pipes are. The Scottish Water officials that presented to the Water Committee said similar in relation to the rollout and the huge cost of the metering programme, which will be, you know, replaced in 20 years' time. It seems that that has to be questioned in relation to it's been, you know, been prudent about how we spend money. There is no doubt that there is a very significant investment needed in some pipes that are, for example, you know, were laid in Victorian times, and whether or not metering is instead of doing, if you like, a group or a community kind of metering programme rather than an individual metering programme, may well be a more prudent way to spend money. It seems to me that we're going to pay to buy more meters, we're going to pay to install more meters, then we're going to pay to maintain more meters, and then we're going to pay to read the meters. Then we're going to pay somebody to do the administration about billing people, and then we'll have to have a helpline in case there are disputes. That seems like an awful lot of money that's going to be shelled out, and I think it's important that government give us some indication of how they have gone about costing what that is, and where the cost-benefit analysis falls in relation to a different type of programme that would probably result in something very similar. One of the main concerns people had regarding Irish Water was the awarding of contracts, and some to high-profile names involved who benefited from those contracts, and unfortunately this legislation does very little to assuage such concerns. But a major issue with the legislation is the lack of specific mention regarding the now changed entity that is Irish Water, and the changed financial reporting structure inherent in that. When it was established, it was proposed that domestic charges would fund it. This will, of course, in addition to charges that would have been on businesses and farms and so on and so forth. This bill now makes it fully publicly funded, a publicly funded entity, and thus I've tabled an amendment which will ensure that the Controller and Auditor General will be given full examination and powers over Irish Water. This year alone, 2017, 753 million has been earmarked for Irish Water. That's in addition to, for example, development contributions, in addition to agricultural water charges, in addition to commercial water charges. So there is a very sizable amount of money that requires oversight. My amendment reads as follows: recognising that Irish Water is a fully state-funded entity, Irish Water shall be required to report as required to the Controller and Auditor General, and to be amenable to all reporting guidelines and inspection and audit powers of the Office of the Controller and Auditor General, as provided for in the Controller and Auditor General Amendment Act 1993. And this has come up a couple of times in the Public Accounts Committee when we've had say, pieces of correspondence about Irish Water, that it's not at all clear where the oversight lies, and there's very clearly a gap. That gap it was because of the way the company or the utility was set up, intended as a semi-state company. It's not that now. Well, it's certainly not a semi-state commercial company, and it does require that kind of oversight. I do want to reiterate the point in relation to household size. It's very difficult, and it would be quite an administrative burden to be able to have all of that information, and it will cost money to get that information, and I question whether or not this is the right way to go at all. I think part of the reason why people wanted also to have it enshrined in the Constitution that this would not become a utility that would be sold on was because there was a lack of trust. And I think this legislation probably reinforces that lack of trust rather than anything else. And where I'm not keen to have amendments in the Constitution that we don't absolutely require, I think that there is there will continue to be a concern about that until that is an unmet need is put to people. The Social Democrats believe that the oversight, as I've outlined, is critical, and it's an omission from the bill is a serious oversight, and as such I would sincerely hope that Government will accept the amendment to the legislation. Thank you.